Shalom, my name is Rabbi Johnny Solomon. I'm the Virtual Rabbi and Chief Learning Officer at WebYeshiva.org, and this is Dear Rav Johnny, which is the name of a new podcast hosted by me and produced by WebYeshiva. As a Virtual Rabbi, I provide online spiritual coaching and halachic consultation services to men, women, and couples. And during these sessions with my clients, I've been asked to address a broad range of real-life and complex issues relating to faith, spirituality, and halacha. In Dear Rav Johnny, I shall be sharing some of the questions I've addressed with my clients, along with some of the Jewish teachings which I've learnt with them. And for all those who are interested, I'll also be making any sources that I quote in Dear Rav Johnny available in the show notes. Of course, if the issues that I address in Dear Rav Johnny inspire you to book a single or series of virtual rabbi sessions with me, you can do so at WebYeshiva.org/about-virtual-rabbi. But even if this is not the case, I hope that you find these conversations informative and helpful. Having now told you a little about Dear Rav Johnny, let us begin. Hi there, welcome to episode 1 of Dear Rav Johnny, and I'd like to jump right into our first topic by listening to a message that I recently received from Chana on the topic of prayer.
Dear Rav Johnny, my name is Chana. I am 33 years old. I grew up in a religious family. I attended Jewish elementary, middle, and high school. I went to seminary in Israel. And throughout my upbringing, I frequently went to shul with my family. What this means is that I think I have a good understanding of Jewish faith and Jewish practice. I have the skills to read and understand Hebrew, and I know how to use a sefer and follow the service in shul. However, I struggle with prayer because prayer is what people who are spiritually connected to. And for the past few years, I've not felt spiritually connected. Perhaps it is because I'm so busy being a mom to 2 young kids, which means that life always seems so busy. But I know that in my heart of hearts, that if I wanted to daven at least something each day, that I'd make the time to do so. But I don't. And for the past few years, I've not prayed. Admittedly, whenever I go to shul, every once in a while I do open a siddur and pray. Beyond this, when I send Tehillim to say for someone who was sick in our community over the situation in Israel, I recite those Tehillim fervently. But other than that, on a regular day, I don't pray. The problem is that over the past few months, my not praying has made me feel like a hypocrite. I look religious, I apparently live a religious life, but I don't pray. At the same time, whenever I open a siddur and try to pray, I get very little from just reciting the words found in the siddur. Having explained my situation, is there any idea or teaching that you can share with me that you think maybe will help me either improve my davening or feel less bad about myself? Thanks so much.
Wow. Before addressing Chana's question, I'd like to first thank her for sending in her question and ask you, dear listener, whether Chana's question resonates with you. Have you had similar experiences with prayer? Do you have a similar feeling of, like Chana, towards prayer? Now, over the years, I've had many conversations with many clients on the topic of tefillah prayer. And in this episode of Dear Rav Johnny, I'll be sharing a number of Jewish teachings which I've learnt with them on this subject and which have resonated deeply with them. At the same time, it is crucial to point out that each spiritual coaching session is unique. Here, knowing more about Chana's situation, what age her children are, what kind of support network she has, and what else is going on in her life are crucial factors in providing her with meaningful and personalized guidance. Still, I believe that there is benefit in me sharing some of the Jewish teachings which I might explore with a client like Chana. And so to begin, we are going to explore the concept of need awareness. In his stunning essay, Redemption Prayer Talmud Torah, Prof. Soloveitchik speaks about the purpose of prayer, and it is here where he introduces us to the phrase need awareness. As he writes, quote, "For Judaism, need awareness constitutes part of the definition of human existence, and as a result, need awareness turns into a passional experience, into a suffering awareness. Therefore, prayer in Judaism, unlike the prayer of classical mysticism, is bound up with the human needs, wants, drives, and urges. Prayer is the doctrine of human needs. End of quote. What Rav Soloveitchik is saying here is that for prayer to be meaningful and for it to be passional, and what a wonderful word that is, it needs to relate to our needs. And for this to happen, we need to be aware of our needs. Of course, we've all heard of self-awareness. The question is, what is need awareness? I believe that need awareness is about us knowing ourselves. It is about us evaluating our physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. And it is about us asking ourselves whether these various needs of ours are being met in our life. Now, in her book, Daring Greatly, How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead, Brené Brown speaks about our needs, and specifically about our emotional needs, where she writes, quote, "Love and belonging are irreducible needs of all men, women, and children. We are hardwired for connection. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our life. The absence of love, belonging, and connection always leads to suffering." End of quote. Now pay attention to the fact that both Rav Soloveitchik and Brené Brown speak of needs and of suffering and of the connection between the two. And why is this so? Because someone who lacks what they need genuinely suffers from that lack. So if I was talking with Chana about prayer, I would ask her to reflect on her needs. And having had numerous conversations like this with my clients, I can tell you that what then happens is that they quickly realize that they've not asked themselves this question for a very long time. In the case of Chana, perhaps due to work pressures, or the dynamics in her marriage, or the daily demands of running after 2 young children, it is quite possible that she has not allowed herself to truly reflect on her needs for many years. And without knowing our needs, we lack need awareness. I should now be clear, though Chana may think she struggles with prayer because she doesn't feel spiritually connected, the fact is that her whole conception of prayer is faulty. Of course, prayer is about spirituality. But what Rav Soloveitchik is saying here is that prayer is not exclusively about spirituality. Instead, it is bound up with the human needs, wants, drives, and urges. And consequently, prayer is only passional if it reflects our needs, and this can only occur if we have need awareness. Now, before we move on to discuss a second idea about prayer, I'd like to ask you, dear listener, whether you know what your needs are and whether you have need awareness. If not, please take a few moments right now to think about that question. And perhaps after listening to this episode, please take a little more time to explore this crucial issue. Now, so far we've spoken about the nature of prayer. But you'll recall that Chana raised a further point when she said that she doesn't regularly pray, and that she doesn't really connect with formal prayer, and that her lack of praying is causing her to feel bad about herself as a religious Jew. As I previously mentioned, if I was talking with Chana, I would endeavor to understand more about her and her situation, which may then reveal that there may be other things going on in her life, which may lead me to recommend that she also speak with a therapist, for example. Still, what do I say to someone who says that they don't pray? My most frequent response to such an individual is to quote the opening paragraph of Rav Kook's Olat Riyah commentary on the Siddur, where he writes the following remarkable idea. אין התפילה באה תיקונה כי אם מתוך המחשבה שבאמת הנשמה היא תמיד מתפללת. We can only pray the way prayer is supposed to be when we recognize that in fact the soul is always praying. הלא היא עפה ומתרפקת על דודה בלא שום הפסק כלל. Without stop, the soul soars and yearns for its beloved. אלא בשעת התפילה המעשית, הרי התפילה הנשמתית התדירית היא מתגלה בפועל. and it is when we outwardly pray that the perpetual prayer of the soul reveals itself in the realm of action. End of quote. What this means is that our soul, which is a gift of the divine within each and every one of us, is perpetually in contact with God, and consequently, our soul is always praying. Of course, just as Brené Brown only spoke about our emotional needs, the needs of our soul are generally just spiritual needs, whereas our total needs are emotional, spiritual, and physical. Still, if someone who thinks they don't pray is made aware that their soul is always praying, then this idea can truly transform them. No longer are they someone who doesn't pray. Instead, they are someone who doesn't formally pray alongside the spiritual prayers which their soul perpetually prays. And having taught and explained this idea to a number of clients, I can say that it's given each one of them a remarkable boost, and it has transformed the way in which they see themselves as spiritual beings. Now, having explained the stunning idea of Rav Kook, which teaches us that our soul is always praying, I frequently share two further thoughts which are also truly life-changing, one from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs and one from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. In terms of Rabbi Sachs, he has a stunning interpretation of Gemara Brachot Chaf Vav Amud Bet, that's page 26b, in his essay Chayei Sarah, Isaac and Prayer, as found in his Covenant and Conversation series, where, while explaining the praying of Yitzchak, who went out lasuach basadeh, meaning that he went out to meditate in the field, to which the Gemara then tells us, en sicha ela tfilah, literally the word sicha means prayer. Rabbi Sachs then translates that phrase to mean conversation is a form of prayer. And he then proceeds to explain as follows, and I quote, "In a profound sense it is so. Prayer is a conversation between heaven and earth, but conversation is also a prayer. For in true conversation, I open myself up to the reality of another person. I enter his or her world. I begin to see things from a perspective not my own. In a touch of two selves, both are changed. A genuine human conversation is therefore a preparation for and a microcosmic version of the act of prayer." It is hard to capture how deeply this teaching resonates with me. But the point here is that conversations with others can often themselves be prayers. In fact, I sincerely believe that every spiritual coaching session I have with a client is itself a prayer to help that client achieve clarity about their goals or about what they need to do to reach them. And in the same spirit, each time we talk with one another in a meaningful way, we too are praying in a non-formal yet deeply profound way. Finally, I'd like to quote Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who recounted after his famous march with Martin Luther King in 1965, and I quote, "For many of us, the march from Selma to Montgomery was about protest and prayer. Legs are not lips, and walking is not kneeling. And yet our legs uttered songs. Even without words, our march was worship. I felt my legs were praying." End of quote. Taken together, when I tell a client what Rav Kook teaches us, that their soul is always praying, and I then tell them what Rabbi Sachs explains, that their conversations can also be a form of prayer, and I then tell them what Rabbi Heschel explains, that whenever we stand up for what is right, that our presence and actions are also forms of prayer, they then immediately stop saying to themselves that they don't pray. Instead, what they do is draw an important distinction, as Rav Kook did, between formal prayer and other forms of prayer. Now, of course, I believe there is great value in formal prayer, which, as Rav Kook explains, is when hatfilah nishmatit hadadirit hi mitbala b'fo'al, the perpetual prayer of the soul reveals itself in the realm of action. Still, a Jew needs to know that they are praying even when they don't think they are praying. And ultimately, they should understand that to live a Jewish life is not just to find time to open a siddur and formally pray, but instead to live a life of prayer, just as David HaMelech writes in Tehillim chapter 109 verse 4, Tehillim Kuftet Pasuk Daled, Ve'ani tefillah, and I am prayer, and to therefore transform our life into a prayer. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dear Rav Johnny. If you have any thoughts or feedback about what was discussed in this episode, please send me an email to ravjohnny@WebYeshiva.org. Beyond this, if you also have a question about faith, religion, or spirituality, then please write to me at ravjohnny@WebYeshiva.org, and it is possible that your question will be featured in a future episode of Dear Rav Johnny. Additionally, I would be very grateful if you could share this podcast wherever you may be watching or listening with your friends and family. If you are interested in my Virtual Rabbi online spiritual coaching or halachic consultation service, visit WebYeshiva.org/about Virtual Rabbi, where you can book a free, no obligation discovery call to discuss how I can help you. Of course, if you are listening to this podcast, then I'm sure you'll enjoy the many free online interactive classes and courses on Tanakh, Talmud, halacha, and Jewish thought, which are available at Web Yeshiva. And so please visit WebYeshiva.org to check out our huge menu of options. Thank you to Tomer Adadi for permission to use his beautiful piano music for the intro and outro of this podcast. And lastly, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, I'm sending you blessings from Israel and wishing you shalom.